Hey, Dave.
Muted, of course. Howdy.
Are we live?
We are.
All right. You've got a Zoom note on. There you go. All right. Good. All right. Good evening, everybody. Tonight is Thursday, June 9th. It is 7 p.m. And this is a regular business meeting of the Lunenburg Finance Committee. We are meeting tonight remotely via Zoom. And I am calling this meeting to order, recognizing a quorum of 4 members. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link below to join the public meeting webinar. Sorry, there is no link, obviously, that you can see here, but it is available on the posted agenda using the Zoom webpage or Zoom app, webinar ID 766-316-7607, or from a telephone, dial toll-free 888-475-4499, webinar ID 766-316-7607. If you are not registered with Zoom, you'll be asked for your name and an email address. No participant ID is needed. Just press pound when asked. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. Computer users and app users may use the feature to request to speak. This agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these decisions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. Because this meeting is remote, we will not do the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Are there any announcements? Hearing none, I do have 3 things that I would like to call the committee and the public's attention to. We do not have a set date yet, but from email that I'm tracking from this afternoon, I think that a likely meeting of the Finance Committee Appointments Committee will be Tuesday, the 21st of June at 6 p.m. If you're interested in attending that meeting, please look for a posted agenda in the days preceding that. Again, it's not confirmed, but it appeared from my email earlier today that that was a likely scenario. Just to remind everybody, both myself and Evan Waters are up for reappointment. Dave Passio's term is also up, concurrent with mine. Dave has opted not to seek it, so we have a pending vacancy on the Finance Committee. So if those of you watching at home are interested, or you think you might be able to cajole a family member or a neighbor into serving on the Finance Committee, please contact the Selectman's office and fill out a talent bank form. And as always, I think any member of this committee would be more than happy to answer questions and point people in the right direction if they are interested. There will be a candlelight vigil this Friday at 6:30 p.m. at the T.C. Passio's School. The vigil is entitled Stop the Violence. It's oriented to the topic of the wave of mass shootings and gun violence that has been so prominent in the news lately. That is this Friday, the 10th of June at 6:30 p.m. There will also be a volunteer reception to thank those of us in the community that are volunteering for the town in various capacities. All of the members of this committee have been invited. It is on the 16th, which I believe is next Thursday at 5:30 p.m. It will run about an hour and a half at the Eagle House. Today was the last day to RSVP, but I'm sure if you put in an email to Elaine in the select board office, I'm sure you could be accommodated if you have not RSVP'd already. I did forward that to members of the committee, but I think it came late. There was an email snafu last week or the week before, and I did not receive notice until just a couple days ago on that event. So that will be next Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Are there any other announcements? Good evening, Evan. Welcome.
Hi there. Sorry about that.
No, hearing none. Is there any public comment? Hearing none. Chair's report. So my only item that I really want to report on tonight is I have had a number of conversations with Michael Ray Jeffries over the course of the last couple of weeks on the topic of scheduling. Those of you who watched the select board's meeting Tuesday night would note that that was a topic of conversation Mr. Jeffries has outlined a schedule throughout the next 12 months, outlining specific meetings where he knows that he expects there to be specific reports and or workshops or discussions ranging from audits to licensing to scheduling town meetings and warrant discussions and everything else all around and in between. And so part of my goal, and with the input of this evening's discussion, is to do something similar, probably on the scale that Mr. Jeffries has done, where he's looked at this as a year, but rather to look at it as a quarter, and begin to give the members of the Finance Committee, number one, the opportunity to kind of plan when the meetings are likely to occur over the course of the next quarter, and also what discussions need to be had over the course of this quarter, so that we collectively, the members of this committee, as well as the town manager and finance director and anyone else for that matter that may have some business with us, to include department heads, may have adequate time to prepare and have appropriate discussions in advance of those meetings. I don't intend to nail down the calendar entirely tonight, but rather to have a discussion about where our priorities are and how things should sit, more or less. And then assuming we have a meeting at the end of June, or perhaps our first meeting in July, prospectively with a new member, and assuming that Evan and I are reappointed, hopefully we can nail down that calendar in early July. That is it for the chair's report. Madam Town Manager and Madam Finance Director, do you have a report this evening?
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. So I'll defer to Karen if she has anything first, because mine's longer, I'm sure.
I don't have anything, Heather.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Karen. So I'll start with everything that I went over on Tuesday night at the select board's meeting and related to finances. And I think the board would be interested in. So I attended a conference last week, and part of it was an update from MMA, different legislative updates as fiscal. So the state is closing the fiscal year with a projected $7 billion surplus, which will result in a supplemental budget bill in the fall. For the FY23 budget, the Senate's proposal doubles unrestricted general government aid for a 5.4% increase and includes $60 per student for minimum aid. It also includes this accelerated funding for charter and special ed reimbursements. Other updates include about remote meetings. There is currently pending legislation to extend the allowance for remote meetings until December 15th, 2023. And the current legislation is set to expire on July 15th. So hopefully we get a little leeway before the 15th, but I'm not expecting too much because that's been kind of the pattern. It's been up to the last minute on that. The retirement board legislation, there's currently a bill that would allow retirement boards to add a COLA increase of up to 5% annually without any other approvals. So the retirement board, so Worcester County Retirement Board, with this, if this passes, would unilaterally be able to make that change. So this would increase our retirement assessment for our unfunded. So I will be contacting our legislators in opposition of that bill. The Cannabis Bill, the Senate has passed a bill that will affect host community agreements, and that would also create a social equity fund that grants access to capital funds to set up recreational cannabis businesses. Another provision of the bill is to require that the fees charged by communities would need to be directly linked to costs, which we find would be a huge administrative burden on behalf of the towns to try to put together all the directly related costs, which is mostly personnel, and which would be an administrative nightmare. So we're advocating against that provision. The Senate version of the bill is going forward, not looking back, but the House version of this bill, it's unclear whether it's past and future impact to the host community agreements. The position of the MMA and the communities that it represents is that the CCC shouldn't have authority over agreements that were entered into, or binding agreements between a community and the business. Other bill that's it's an act that is already, we talked about previously, was the Mbta Housing Choice Act. It's attracted a lot of attention by communities, rightfully so, as there's a huge impact to those communities, which includes Lunenburg. That's something that was brought to light is possible litigation if a community links this to affordable housing, because nothing in the statute allows for a requirement for affordable housing, and because it's a as-right statute. Updates on IT. Our installation of our network equipment is complete, so we're glad that project is fully installed. They're doing cleanup work related to that. It's more aesthetic, and cabling and ceiling tiles that needed to be replaced and such. Also need to move around some access points for Wi-Fi coverage, but nothing that will affect the network going forward. So no downtime. All the town email accounts have been migrated over, with the exception of the library. We came to light this week that the library emails through CW Mars are not archived. So we are going to create town email accounts for all the library employees. And so that will be next step for them. Once all those accounts are created, I have a meeting next week with our IT consultant to talk about the timeline for the boards and committee members. So that will be forthcoming, and correspondence will be sent out on that timeline. The trainings that will be included as part of the pre and post migration as well. Capital plan updates, fiscal 21, the Ritter Building break room project. Meeting with Monty Tech staff next week to go over that project. That project was initially scheduled for this school year, but due to staffing changes and vacancies, that had to be postponed. So we're now on their schedule for the fall for that project. So that was good news. Some not as good news is a 6-wheel dump truck for the DPW and the 3/4 ton pickup truck with plow for DPW. We're having trouble getting quotes or even commitments for obtaining this truck. Initially, the previous DPW director contacted Combis, but there was no commitment from the dealership for either of those trucks for the purchase. So right now, the town mechanic and the DPW director are trying to search out options for those. So that's part of our supply chain issues that everyone's experiencing. So it's hard to get new vehicles, and especially for the larger vehicles like the 6-wheel dump truck. The 2 police cruisers, they're waiting on parts for consoles for those cruisers. Expect that time frame to be in the next at least a month out for those to be completed, depending on when those parts come in. The Ritter ADA ramp and envelope project and the town hall building envelope project, both of those projects were supposed to be discussed at a hearing on Monday night by the APDC, but they did not have a quorum. So those both have been delayed to June 27th. The old gas station at 925 Mass Ave, we have proceeded with our tax title attorney to move forward with that foreclosure. Due to additional mortgagee parties on that deed, that they had to reissue a notice to those parties, and they were successfully notified. They have until June 20th to respond. And if they do not respond, that will initiate our tax title attorney will file a motion to issue a foreclosure judgment. And from that date, there's a 1 redemption period that needs to be finalized before the town can do anything with that property. So hopefully this time next year, that will be, we'll complete that process. The Town Beach building, the asbestos abatement work was just completed. So we'll now move on to putting that construction portion out to bid. But I do not anticipate the building to be usable this season, but all beach operations will be conducted outside of the building and outside of the construction zone. And that's about all I have.
Peter, if I may, I'd like to ask one question, the town manager.
Sure, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. Heather, could you give us an update on the streetlight purchase? As you know, you were there, Board of Selectmen's meeting. One of the Board of Selectmen was approached by a citizen complaining about streetlights out on Lancaster. Well aware of that as a committee all over town for a long period of time. But I'm wondering where the purchase and sale is at. My understanding was that we were at the point where the number was agreed on and we were ready to move forward. Is that not correct? And could you give me a little bit better timeline if you have one?
Unfortunately, I don't have a better timeline. I reached back out to our council. The number had been agreed upon. It's now, right now, it's going back on language between the two attorneys. So I hope to have by Monday a better timeline, and that it's gone on way too long. But the streetlights that were identified as not working, Unitil is aware of those lights. We made it clear that we don't want those replaced, because that would affect our purchase price.
Right.
That once I have the information for that, those additional lights that were brought up on Tuesday, that same statement will be made clear to Unitil that we're just identifying that this is a light that's not working, but we're not asking for it to be replaced. We just don't want to be charged for it.
Okay, thank you for that update. Only one other quick question. As we talked a few months ago, how do you foresee the process of getting a maintenance contract in place quickly once we own the streetlights. Because we're going to do some maintenance before we do the conversion, I would imagine.
Yeah, that would be something that I would also have to go out to bid, which we have a number of projects right now that need to be worked on for bids. So it's in the queue. That's all I can say right now. But I don't see it being a lengthy process as far as securing that.
Okay, thank you very much. I only asked the questions this evening because, as far as I know, I don't foresee a Green Communities meeting coming up in the very near future, and I would assume that there'll be a new member of this committee on that committee by then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Waters.
Just a quick question. Could you go into a little bit more detail as to why we're against the COLA increase? I think I just kind of missed what the reasoning was behind that. I'm just for my own kind of clarity.
So it would be a unilateral decision by the retirement board with no confirmation from the town, and it would severely impact our assessment amount annually. So we'd have no control over how much our annual unfunded liability assessment would be for retirement.
Do you know, Heather, any sort of estimation in terms of what that might translate to in terms of dollars?
If I had to guess, could be like 50,000, I think. But I'd have to look at the actual numbers. I'm pulling. Karen, do you have a 5% increase on that?
And I guess a better question is, would there be a direct relationship to the unfunded liability and the increase? I guess probably a better way to put it.
Yeah, because would compound over the years.
Okay.
So that would, an actuarial would have to do all that work, but
So
that would be part of our, I think, our actuarial estimation on that liability costs.
So one thought on that, and I don't know if this has been discussed with our legislators, or I know that you brought this to the select board's attention on Tuesday. It came literally less than a minute after a discussion about a $7 billion surplus at the state, and both are topics of pending legislation. And in my mind, I can certainly understand the reasoning for a COLA increase in excess of 2.5% when inflation is hovering around 8% right now. But it's really a matter of where does the burden belong, and the state is collecting unprecedented revenues, and we're capped as a town. So there's potentially a way to deal with this, I guess, is what I'm getting to, and I'm wondering if that conversation is one that can be had.
So I just know that headline grabber. I haven't had time, since the meeting last week to look more thoroughly into it. But
is this something that our legislators are conversant in at this point? Do you know?
I haven't reached out to them yet, so that I would find out when they do. Okay,
thank you. Do you know, on the Cannabis Bill issue, if this were a backward-looking requirement, what have we actually collected in fees relative to cannabis-related activities? Are they mostly application level, or do we have any liabilities there?
We have not collected anything because we have only signed one HCA, and that business isn't up and running yet. So, but what if it were, going back, the CCC could review our HCA, even though they're not a up and running business yet, and make, say these specific terms are not compliant with regulations, or so that's the concern. Like, this is something the town and this business entered into in good faith at that time, and having a state agency who wasn't involved in that to come and review it after the fact.
And to be clear, this legislation is applicable to fees, not taxation associated with cannabis sales.
Correct.
Okay.
Fees.
Okay. On the issue relating to the DPW vehicles, do you anticipate a cost associated with this issue?
There could be, based on what we all know is pricing of vehicles right now. There could be an inflation factor.
So these vehicles we're talking about vehicles that were appropriated at the May 21 town meeting for purchase in FY 22, right? So we're still in FY 22, and we're talking about state contracts, right? So the issue is really finding a dealer to acknowledge the order. Is that a correct interpretation?
Right, meaning whether there's actually vehicles out there to purchase. Because right now there's more used vehicles available than brand new, readily available, as far as timing wise.
So, and I know zero about state contracting. So bear with me here. Because a dealer is on the state contract and represents that they are doing business as a signatory to the state purchasing contract, is there any obligation to take that business, or how does that work?
No, just if you purchase a truck or a car through a state contract, that's the pricing you would get. They're not guaranteed to have, X number of trucks, in stock for you to purchase. It's the pricing.
Okay. And what is the normal sequence to how these purchase orders are acknowledged? Like, I've been in the car market for a little while, right? I pick up the phone and call the dealer and say, I want that car. They have it or they don't have it. They take the deal or not. And it's a matter of a phone call or two. It sounds like this is something that's a little bit more involved, but it's June 9th. So what should be a reasonable timeline for this sort of thing?
Every state contract is different. You have to look at the terms of the state contract. And I wasn't specifically involved in this, the DPW director to this, so I can't answer that related to these.
Okay. And who owns this problem right now? Is it the DPW? Is there a purchasing function in town? Like, who is responsible to drive this to ground right now?
The DPW director and the town mechanic are working on this.
Okay. And then my last question is, and I'll get back to you, Evan, in a second here. My last question is, and this is just because I don't remember, the funding for the town beach building, was that an appropriation specific to that building, or how are we funding that project?
That's through the budget.
Through what budget?
Through the parks budget. It's a parks building.
Okay. So I don't recall a special appropriation being made for construction on that building. And I also don't know that I need to go back and look, but I don't recall there being a substantial building maintenance line in that budget. So
It's a purchase to service line, and that's what we have for available funds to do the work.
so this is basically end of year spending.
Yes, yep.
Okay. Dave, you're muted if you're trying to talk to us. I'm sure you have some interesting commentary here.
No, just a quick question on the mechanics. I know what the balance is on the line item. I got those numbers today. I'm assuming that we're going to encumber what's left in that line item towards that project. And then, because obviously it's not going to be completed before July 1st. And then any additional funding will come out of the line item in the next fiscal year. Is that an appropriate evaluation?
Yep, as long as we have all those figures available by the date we need to submit for encumbrances.
Speaking of which, do we
have
know?
to have the project then already you have to have a number, a good number attached to a project before you can encumber money?
Right, and that's why we're working on trying to get it out to bid and get costs for it.
Okay, thank you.
So we don't really know what the number is still on this.
I think it will be at least 20,000 for the construction.
Okay. Mr. Waters.
Just, do we have any update on what's going on with the air conditioning assessment at the primary school? Has anything come of that since annual town meeting or anything?
I have not talked to the superintendent about that since. I don't know if it's been brought up at the school committee meetings. I don't know.
I missed the last one, so I don't know either. Okay.
And I haven't had a chance to reach out, but I was going to do that soon. Just to make sure that doesn't slip to the side. The other being the issues they see with Turkey Hill Elementary. They promised to put a list together of the deficiency they see in the building.
So as a follow-up, Heather, would you like to reach out to the superintendent, or I could do it? I just want to be cognizant of open meeting law here. I think an update is in order, and we can just distribute it via email. Is that?
Yep, I can reach out to him.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the town manager? All right. I do want to make note in our email earlier tonight, and I have not looked at the attachments yet, but we did receive an email from the town manager that included the FY21 financial statements and the FY21 management letter, and I'm not sure what that last attachment is. Reports on federal award programs year ending June 30, 2021. So that is in your email. Heather, is that the content that will be discussed at the select board meeting next week, or is it more current content?
No, that will be the fiscal 21 audit.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Discuss summer calendar and topics for discussion. So I've got an outline on my screen here. I'm not going to share it yet, but I may wind up sharing my screen. Before today's meeting, I went through and looked at a calendar at the potential dates that we have for meetings over the course of the next quarter. And in my mind's eye, if we assume a special town meeting in November, we will probably be spending some time on special town meeting in September, probably in the way of a public hearing or something along those lines. So keeping that in mind, the prospective meeting dates that we have are May 23rd, July 14th, July 28th, August 11th, August 25th, September 8th, and September 22nd. So if you assume that a new committee is sat by the 7/14 meeting, we have 2 meetings a month for 3 months. So there's 6 meetings. One topic that we will need to discuss tonight is whether we need to meet on June 23rd. My personal bias is that we don't need to meet that night, but I think that that's a fair topic for discussion in a moment. The priority topics that I've gathered from our previous meeting and discussions that I've had since, both in the Municipal Building Design Committee meeting, as well as conversations that I've had with the chair of the select board, I've got basically 6 potential topics. The first is goals, procedures, and asks for budget presentation. So basically the renewal and update of our goals and procedures document. Fiscal policies. So the select board is going to be reviewing their fiscal policies as a complete review of town policies and procedures. That is currently slated for August. One of their meetings in August, and I don't recall the specific date. But I spoke with the town manager earlier today and said, okay, what do you think the finance committee's involvement in this ought to be, and how should we think about approaching this, if at all? Again, our role is to advise town meeting on adherence to fiscal policies, but I think that we also have a unique perspective to potentially advise and comment on policy changes that the select board may consider. And so my thinking on this is that at some point in late July, we probably ought to do that. We probably ought to, as a homework assignment, read the fiscal policy and discuss. However, this relates to some other topics. Third topic is debt planning for new building projects. So the Municipal Building Design Committee met this week on Monday. There's general consensus that the town manager, the select board, and the finance committee ought to weigh in on some guardrails, financial guardrails for planning for a couple of potential scenarios that are being actively discussed. We haven't really arrived at what the appropriate way to get to that request is. So there's some disagreement on the Building Design Committee in terms of what the Building Design Committee's authority is, or should they ask the Select Board or Finance Committee, or how that should come about. But I think it's likely to come about. But debt planning is going to affect fiscal policy direction, I think, or it may. And so I think there's maybe some overlap on those topics that we'll need to have some conversations about. Those conversations, and the town manager can certainly jump in on this, I think will certainly be informed by the finance director, the town manager, and maybe our financial consultants as well. So there's probably a degree of prior planning and discussion and work that needs to go on there. Senior tax relief is on the calendar, is not on the calendar for this summer, but has been discussed as a topic of conversation for the select board. They have a subcommittee looking at that right now. And I think that is something that we are going to need to weigh in on, or should weigh in on, I think, and consider and discuss. And then a couple of, I think, less pressing for for financial discussions, but I think are probably equally pressing to the topic in terms of how we run our board. I think we need to have a discussion about document management. So as we make the transition to Microsoft Outlook as our email host and OneDrive and Office 365, I think we need to kind of think through how we're managing documents and ensuring that we're in compliance with open meeting law, by the way. I think that transparency of our documents was good this year compared to previous years. I think we made a gigantic step forward. The town manager did a really good job in posting documents on the web page. There was a section on the bottom of the web page around annual town meeting and budget related topics. But I think in terms of our handling of documents and that sort of thing, I think that we need to maybe have a discussion about that and maybe even add that to our policies and procedures. And then lastly, onboarding. And this is another thought that I took from the chair of the select board. We've never really thought seriously about the best way to onboard new members. And it's largely been baptism by fire on the finance committee. You kind of learn as you go over the course of the first year, and then you do a little bit better the second year and a little bit better the third year. But there is no sort of mandatory reading list or that sort of thing that says, these are the things, the procedures, the things you need to be aware of to be a successful and contributive member to the finance committee as early as possible. And Dave and I came in one year and we were extremely disruptive, quite frankly. Chris and Evan came in the next year and they were considerably less disruptive and more contemplative. And Tom came in last year and I think, asked a lot of really good critical questions that we didn't have great answers for, other than, yes, we need to deal with that. But I think that some of those questions could potentially have come earlier in the process had they been better advised by folks like myself in terms of how to be prepared and productive as finance committee members. So I think that figuring out kind of what is the finance committee 101 and, how to do that is something that probably is worth some brainstorming on the part of our committee, perhaps in consultation with the new member that comes on board. So I think that that's a potential area for an early discussion in our term in July. So those are 6 areas that I came up with. The other area of discussion that we can potentially look at that we've done in 2 of the last 3 years is what I call off-season discussions with department heads. So if you recall, last year, we brought in most of the department heads for informal, largely roundtable conversations during our meeting time. I don't know if we should or need to do that this year. As I look at the department heads, I don't think I need to meet with all of them to have these discussions. I think, we've got a new DPW director. We're bringing in a new facilities director. In my mind, those are good get acquainted discussions to have, but I'm not sure, frankly, I think the police department is a good place to have a discussion always. But given some of the world events and national events that we've seen over the course of the last couple of weeks, I think perhaps a more detailed discussion about training may be in order. But I wanted to kind of survey the board and have an open and free discussion about all of that, so that, I can put together for, prospectively the 23rd or the 14th, a much more solid and well put together calendar for Q1 of the next fiscal year. So I'll shut up and Dave's got his hand up. So Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I won't be involved in, all the stuff you guys are lining up right now going forward, except as a member of the public, which I will be there. Just not quite as much as in the past.
I have no doubt.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, one comment, just to give you a heads up, and my recollection isn't real clear on this, but I kind of have in the back of my mind that the fiscal policy was actually created by the Finance Committee a lot of years ago. And then the Finance Committee did a review of the fiscal policy and sent those recommendations onto the Select Board. Now, that could be one of my dreams, but I believe that was the process because I kind of remember it prior to me, maybe even Terry being the chair. Oh, it was definitely before Terry was on the chair, but Terry might have been on the committee when they did that process. Just a heads up.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's good contextual information, and it'd be worth probably doing a little bit of research into. As I read it, the fiscal policies are owned by the Select Board. They set the fiscal policy. I think we have a role in making recommendations, and obviously the prescribed role in the charter is to make recommendations to town meeting. So I want to be careful about not overstepping our bounds here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's good fodder for discussion and make sure that we're kind of clear, and that for that matter, the Select Board is clear before we get into it. So
slightly different wording in the charter and so on, but capital planning went through that process a year or so ago, reviewing the capital planning process as it related to the dollar numbers for projects. Mm-hmm. And the Select Board wanted us to discuss it and recommend before they made any changes. So yeah. I think if you have that relationship, I think it might work.
I agree. And by the way, from my conversations with Michael Ray, he's open to any of these shows, but also, Michael Ray, as you would expect, is, he views this as this is a Select Board driven activity, which it is, and it should be. They're just figuring out what the right role is for the Finance Committee in this. So,
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Baelish.
Hi, everyone. So I'll comment on three of the items, Peter. The first one is the Finance Committee kind of 101 that you described. So you're right. As a new committee member last year, lots of learning. There's many topics that come up that I think, gosh, I'd love to drill into that and understand it, but there's just not time to do all that. So I think some type of a deck or a bunch of information put together, or some kind of, I honestly, I think I probably erred in that I should have tried to get Karen's time and go spend a couple hours with her. And really try to understand some of this better. So I've got a bit of a passion for that. So I'd be happy to volunteer to work on something like that. And I think of some kind of a document that we could put together, and perhaps a bit of a mini training program for a few hours, maybe with Karen and somewhat with Heather, just to understand the nuts and bolts of how it all works. As well as probably with you, Peter, but I'm happy to volunteer to be part of that or to lead that. I'm either way. On the debt side,
as chair, you are hereby appointed and anointed.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm big on training and learning, so I'm
and obviously, Tom, I'm very interested in working on that with you and just making sure
great,
on the same sheet
of course. And maybe Tom, the other Tom can. I'd love to hear his feedback on that too. Mm-hmm. On the debt piece, again, that's another area that I think is really important for the town going forward. And, I think I mentioned to you in an email, I missed the last meeting, but in an email that I think having a better, for lack of a better term, a debt 101 session with some of our debt consultants, advisors, bankers, et cetera, would be really helpful. Understand where we are, the way it works, what's the existing debt, and modeling out maybe some future capacity, et cetera. It'd be really helpful, I think, for this committee and for the town overall. So that to me, I think, is a really high priority. And then just a comment on the department heads. Again, as a new member last year, having the department heads come in prior to the budget process, I thought for me was really valuable in understanding and getting to know the folks involved and so forth. And I can understand maybe it's, the incremental value is maybe a little less this year than it was last year. But I did really quite value that and having a conversation that wasn't specifically budget oriented and it was more general about the operations of the department or the key issues. And I did feel it set us up for pretty good success on the budget discussions. But I'm completely open to the what the committee's comments on that. I just want to give you my personal perspective was that it was very useful for me as a new member.
Okay. Yeah. I think they're useful every year. I want to also economize our time though as well. So I want to be thoughtful about that. And it may be that we don't do all the department heads. We do the ones we want to do. And then every member of this committee has all the opportunity in the world to meet individually with any department head as well. And I hope we're all taking those opportunities when they present themselves. But I think there's value to having a group discussion too, because there's a lot of context that people who've been around for a while or have been privy to other conversations can bring that a one-on-one conversation isn't necessarily going to bring. So, Mr. Menard, you're muted. You're still muted.
Okay, sorry.
Hey,
I agree with what Tom said and what you and Dave said as well. I think on the bringing the department heads in, it certainly DPW and the facilities door will be critical to get to meet. A lot of what is presented during the budget season, I think could have been presented during those earlier meetings to give a good overview of what they are. And then get a little bit more into the translation of that into budgets during budget season, which would probably make the budget season go a little quicker. I would love to see kind of that, those block diagrams or architecture, the fiscal architecture, if you will, as well, so that people understand all the funding sources, all the ways we think about money, because it's not obvious. It's kind of a language that Heather and Karen intimately understand, and about 80% of the time, maybe seasoned members kind of understand. But that I think that would be very valuable, not only to the Finance Committee, but probably to general public, if that were to be pulled together and made available. And then on the whole issue of documents, I'd really like to get away from emailing documents. It is so hard to keep track of where the latest ones are. And if we move to this new environment, I tried to take all the emailed documents and put them into the folders that that are established. But perhaps now that we have Amanda to do our minutes, maybe the role of the clerk really becomes somewhat document management as well. So that it's easy to find, and it's again, there's a data architecture behind it that it's you can go back and find a document that is helpful. So
I think that's a really good idea. So a couple of thoughts. Those of you who live in Microsoft Office 365 environments, assuming that we get the full suite, it is actually pretty elegant in terms of finding documents and linking to documents and in that sort of thing. So I'm hopeful that we can come up with a document management process / policy that will serve us for a year, and then we can kind of go back and refine and learn from. Because I agree with you. Now, the other benefit of using Microsoft is that search and filter capabilities are a million times better than they are on the, crappy Edition Networks system that we're on right now. So that process should also improve drastically as well. Just email management, which I agree is trying to find something in my town email is a horrible experience right now. So I agree. I think, and again, I will kind of come back with a proposal for our next meeting. But Chris, is that something that you could put some thought into as well as we get into the training and transition to Office 365? Like, because you've done a great job, in my opinion, of keeping those folders updated and keeping us somewhat disciplined in terms of naming conventions, which I'm horrible at, and those kinds of things. Could you maybe take the lead on that?
Yeah, for sure. And again, if people found the way that we organized it helpful or any room for improvement on it, I think that would, just let me know. It's not perfect because sometimes you don't remember what meeting a certain topic came about. So maybe that's not the perfect way of doing it. But I do think that if we are discussing a document in a meeting, it should be archived in that meeting folder because it is part of the public record. And if someone asks for it, it should be able to be made available.
Yep.
And then, perhaps the way the data is laid out could also be aligned to that, financial architecture as well. So, again, maybe Karen doesn't need to any longer mail us reports. We could either link to them in her own areas or her areas and kind of think about it that way. The IT group might be able to help us as well. If we think about it as an enterprise architecture, they may have some thoughts for doing it kind of across all the boards and commissions so that there's a fairly consistent way of doing it.
So, just want to think about this a little bit. I think one of the requests that Michael Ray has made of me, and I've kind of given him a few different scenarios in terms of how to deal with this, a whole range of compliance, I would say, and you'll understand why I'm grinning in a second, is how to reduce the burden on Karen and Heather when it comes to documentation prep. And, I think part of the answer there is, number one, better communication and planning, bi-directional communication and planning about what's going on with respect to selectmen activities and what our needs are, aligning our calendars. When the auditors are going to the select board or when Karen's doing a quarterly report to the select board, we should have those documents in advance. We should be notified that those reports are going to happen. So there's no need to really have a formal discussion with the finance committee, but we can just Q&A either in our meetings or as needed if individual questions come up to Karen. If we come up with a new template that we would like department heads to bring their budget to us in, and if I were a department head, my knee-jerk reaction would be like, stop, don't make us do this, right? But I think that if we were to work with Karen and look at, okay, how is this done in Munis? How does Munis relate to the omnibus budget reports that we currently get? What's the right way to break that out in a presentation of the finance committee that is understandable and reasonably brief and that sort of thing? If we go through that process thoughtfully over the course of the next few months, there could be an added benefit where it's actually less work.
I think that's certainly the case. I mean, if Karen has a document that she has to share with 3 or 4 boards, commissions, department heads, et cetera, and she just has it available in one spot, and it's made public at the time where it's ready to be public or shared, then we could just link it from our our locations so that we know how to get to it. And she's not emailing it to everyone and then making sure that we got it. And then, so, yeah, I think that's kind of the power of these types of environments.
I do think that there's, the opportunity to make progress here is not to work the logistics of this in a public meeting. It's probably you or me, sit down with Karen and, those in terms of what the best way to do this is, and then bringing it back at that meeting where we discuss the goals, procedures, and budget presentations as a, prospective way of doing this. And I think we can do that, right? So long as we have the appropriate amount of time to figure this out in advance.
We're not going to get there overnight either.
Yeah. But I absolutely want to do this. I'm sensitive to a few things. Number one, I'm sensitive to the members of this committee who don't think that they have gotten the totality of the information that they need, or the consistency of information, so that it's presented in a way that's framed in a consistent manner, so that we can get our heads around it quickly. I think that we are owed that. The flip side of it is I know that our colleagues on the full-time professional side of the business of town government have a ton of work to do. As is evidenced by the discussion we just had about bid preparation. And so we got to figure out a way to solve both problems, or make progress on both problems simultaneously. And I think that's going to require a little bit of thought and creativity.
And then the final maybe thought on, you mentioned the relationship to the building design committee and what this board's role is on that. And, you as our representative to that, I've heard now many scenarios being put out. And I do think that fiscal modeling that Tom talked about in a holistic view is an important aspect of our role, and then your representation of us into that board's or committee or whatever their role. And I obviously that going forward is whatever steps and in whatever sequencing and however big or small we do that, that's going to be a major driver for us over the next potentially several years. So I do think we need attention and some discussion on that throughout the next summer, fall, maybe.
Yep. I agree. And, I stated that at the meeting on Monday, and I think there's general consensus that we need to do that to be successful. Part of the challenge is going to be, and I'll talk a little bit about this in my committee report, is, are we going to have two scenarios? Are we going to have one scenario? Or are we going to have 6 scenarios, right? And we're a little early in our process to know how that's going to shake out. But once we're close to figuring out how many tracks there are going to be, we need to start doing some financial modeling around those tracks. So. Okay. Are there any topics that we have missed, or that any member of the board would like to have considered?
When did we ask our representatives to come in?
Good question. So that was, they actually came in January of this past year. But if you recall, they actually postponed from, they were due to come in during the Chapter 70 discussion that we had in late October, and they went into a session and couldn't participate. So, I think that we should do that again, but I'm not sure of what the right time. I don't think it's a Q1 activity. I think it's a late Q2 or early Q3 activity.
Yeah, I agree. Well, when are they elected?
They are elected in November, the first Tuesday in November.
Yeah, so maybe it's a Q4, because we're going to have a new rep.
We will have a new rep, and all 3 will be up for re-election or election in November. So, yeah. But I think you're right, because there'll be a change in session. So this year will be a little bit different from last year in terms of their calendar and what needs to happen over the course of the turn of the year. If there's any end of year legislation that has to get jammed through or whatever. So, plus we'll have a governor that's leaving office as well. So that could affect things. Okay, any other topics? But thanks for bringing up the legislators. That is something we need to track. Okay. So I will consult with both the town manager and the finance director over the course of the next couple of weeks, and refine this a little bit and hopefully come up with topics attached to dates, is my goal. That being said, I don't see a pressing reason for us to meet on the 23rd. I know Mr. Baelish is not going to be available because he just told me that via IM. There is actually a fundraiser that evening for Lunenburg football that I would like to attend, although this already. So does anybody have any objection with not meeting on the 23rd and just reconvening on the 14th?
When did terms expire?
They expire the 30th of this month.
Is there anything that Dave is involved in on our behalf that we need to think about between the 30th and the 14th?
That's a good question. So Dave represents us on the capital. The most obvious one is the capital planning committee. Dave also represents us on green communities, I believe. I think we appointed that position. Did we appoint that?
I thought he was appointed by.
I'm not sure. It just escapes me. I think we're getting some background from PAC. Do you guys have a hot microphone? Could everybody mute? I think our sound is down in the office in there. Try that again. All right. So I think that the most pressing issue with Dave's representation is the capital planning committee. My understanding is that his term is not congruent. His capital planning term is not congruent with his finance committee term. I believe it expires in 23. So we will need to have a conversation with Dave, who dropped out and will hopefully be back, about what his intentions are there. And then we need to have a conversation about what our intentions as a sitting board are, with respect to that position. And I don't think it's really appropriate to shake that out until the 14th, given that we may have an opportunity to have a new sitting member on the committee.
Green Communities is an appointed position, by the way.
Appointed by the select board, or
Serving three-year term, appointed by the select board, and two
Okay.
associate members.
okay. So the other thing that will obviously be in the meeting on the 14th is reorganization, and committee assignments. And I need to, prior to that meeting, circulate a list of committee assignments and have individual communications with each of you in terms of what you're currently doing and what you're interested in doing. I'd like to get some sort of prospective slate prior to that meeting for discussion at that meeting. So I'm going to try to put that together in advance of that meeting.
So to the topic of the capital planning representation, and whereas the capital requests have gotten so large, I think we need to revisit a discussion we've had over the last couple months related to the board's expectation of the individual that we put into that position, and the reporting back, and the how we help to influence that process.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I can't believe I forgot to put this on my list of priority topics. So I think there's two things to discuss. I think that the role of the representative needs to be discussed. I also think that the process needs to be discussed around the rigmarole that we went through in the run up to town meeting. And I think there are a few different scenarios that can potentially address that problem. But we need to have a meeting with that as an agenda item to figure out what our course of action should be.
Yeah, and there's also just a tremendous volatility around the entire bidding and everything else that has been evident in both vehicles and, the culverts and, all sorts of things. It seems to have gotten very complex over the last couple of years.
So welcome back, Dave. We're talking about your favorite topic, which is capital planning. You're absolutely right, Chris. I think capital planning has turned into a much bigger thing because we're dealing with much bigger numbers first. But secondly, I think, the current economy, inflation, the lack of people to do the work that we need to have done, the shortage of skilled labor, is kind of all contributing to that mix. And I think that some of it we can't solve and really bring a whole lot of value to, but I think that the process and the representation, I think we can contribute to.
Right.
I agree. So we now have 7 items. So we now have 6 meetings and 7 items. So we've got a lot to do, actually, as it turns out. So Heather asked me the question when I talked with her today, do you think you're going to meet twice a month throughout the summer? The answer to that question is yes, we're going to.
You may want to let Dave know about the 23rd.
Yeah, so Dave, before you rejoined, we had a discussion about a brief sort of acclimation discussion around a meeting on the 23rd. There are at least a couple of conflicts with that night, and in my opinion, no pressing reason to meet that night, assuming I bring a well thought out agenda for Q2 to the first, or to Q1 to the first meeting in Q1. So that's kind of where we're leaning, is not meeting on the 23rd. But the unintended effect is that this becomes your last meeting.
Yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate Evan asking that be brought up. Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Makes total sense, unless something flares up before then that warrants calling that meeting. And, that's kind of how we've always done it going into the late spring and summer anyway. I see no problem with that from my perspective. This turns out to be my last meeting if you don't call another one before the end of June. I will say it's been a pleasure serving on FinCom. I had always said years ago when I was approached that I wanted to be able to commit to a minimum of 5 years. And, it started out with, it looked like those 5 years that 5-year window was available. But the circumstances of the last year that most of you are aware of has just told me that it's time for me to move on to the other piece of my life that I need to live before it's too late. So, and I'm not saying there's anything in particular going on at this point. In fact, I'm feeling better now than I have in 5 years. So, that said, I appreciate all the input that you guys have had. I know I lose my temper occasionally, and it's all in my love for the town and my knowledge of the town over the 68 years that I've been here, and my involvement and sitting through meetings that nobody could figure out why I was there, but it gave me the historical background for just about everything that's been happening in the last decade. So I've felt good and comfortable. In my early years, I was one of those renegades, even before I was on boards, that would go to Board of Selectmen's meetings without having done the research and blared something out and shake a tree just to see what would fall out of it. As I matured a little bit more in town politics, I did a little more research before I did that. So I'd have some expectation as to what was going to fall out of the trees. My last comment, you guys were talking about it earlier, the onboarding of new members. I also have seen both Toms come into their comfort zone over the past year or less. I'm not sure exactly how long you guys have been on since your appointments. But I always say that, you guys have brought up good questions. It's obvious that you are concerned about the town's finances, but make sure your voice is heard. Don't be overpowered. You're a multi-member committee, and you may not agree on everything, but you'll find a consensus at some point. But be willing to be that dissenting person if you feel that strongly about it. And I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Although I suspect I'll still hear your voice.
Yeah, Dave's voice is not going away.
Thank you,
When he's
Dave.
calling on Parks.
Yeah, Parks is starting to get busier than planning and finance committee, I'll tell you, with all that's going on. But
All right, I also promised Heather that it'd be a short meeting, and I think I'm already breaking my word. So I want to move on. I've got quite a bit of homework to do, and I'll be in touch with individuals here that we've discussed on some of these topics over the next few weeks. Minutes. We have minutes in the drive from 5/19, I believe.
Yep, May 19th.
Is there a motion for the minutes or a discussion?
Make a motion that we approve the minutes of May 19th.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Roll call vote. Mr. Menard,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Baelish.
I'm going to abstain. I have not read them.
Okay, and an aye for myself. The minutes are passed and approved. Thank you for seconding the motion. Committee reports. Mr. Passios, come on.
yes, it's quieted down quite a bit. The only thing I can report is that Parks is meeting next Wednesday, and we have a very full agenda, issues that are coming before us. The beach season is approaching, and we've been struggling to get some fires put out there. Obviously, you heard earlier about the building. So accommodating the needs without the building has been a challenge, but we've pulled it off. So the beach will be opening. I believe it's a week from this Saturday or something like that. Close. It's in the 16, 17 of June date range. So that's moving forward. Marshall Park planning is kind of in a limbo stage. We're going to be trying to see what the commissioners see as a prioritization of projects versus what the architects came up with, talk about funding sources, so on and so forth in that respect. And we've got a couple other new projects that will stretch out into the coming years that are just starting to come into initial discussions. That's it.
The town manager has IM'd me that opening day for Town Beach is June 18th.
Okay. I knew it was in the teens. I just wasn't sure
So that
exactly.
is next Saturday.
Right.
So, and you can buy your beach passes at Town Hall.
It's online, isn't it?
Is it online now?
The MyRec site.
Okay.
Online.
There's a link on the website, I assume.
Yes, you go through the parks
Okay.
link. It brings you to that page.
All right. Get your Town Beach passes. Any other committee reports? Mr. Waters?
School committee met last week, but I was not able to attend the meeting, and I have not had a chance to watch it. So if there's somebody else that did watch it, feel free.
I got about 2 minutes of it. So it was one of those nights in my house.
Yeah, same. I'll go back and watch it, though, before at some point and see if there's anything else that was pertinent.
Any other committee reports? As I mentioned earlier, the Municipal Building Committee met on Monday. We had basically 2 homework assignments that we reported out on. One was a prioritization of uses that were included in the previous TC Pasio's project plan, and how we would see approaching those uses under more with less budget, I guess is how I would put it in real simple language. And then secondly, the King for a Day scenario. So basically every member was surveyed on, if you were for a day, what would you do and how would you approach this town office space, community use, PAC, all these other that we need to deal with, how would you approach them? And there were a variety of different scenarios that were outlined. Common conclusions were that Ritter is potentially a good place for school department administration offices and meeting space, and potentially some program space as well, all kind of TBD. There's certainly an appetite for new municipal office space, but a couple of different scenarios emerged that I'll outline. One is a new building, prospectively to be put either on the current TC Pasio's site or at the 30 School Street site. I was the lone member who said that I thought we should put it where the Tri-City Marina building is in front of the police and fire station. But I was the only one that raised that potential scenario. So I don't see that as a likely course of action. And there was a discussion about, as we do things, we also need to ensure that we have space to continue programming as we're building and transitioning and moving people around. And if we're not building something that accommodates the programs that are going on today in the gymnasium at TC Pasio's and cafeteria at TC Pasio's, and for that matter, PAC, we either need to preserve that building while we're doing what we're doing or come up with an alternative. And then another scenario was brought up by Michael Ray Jeffries that was different. It was unique, but I think most of us think that it ought to be vetted. And his idea is to build a new elementary school first on the site of the current TC Pasio's lot, either directly where the building stands today or the lot that's adjacent to it. Program in that building both educational elementary school stuff, but also ensure that we have appropriate gymnasium space and that kind of thing to serve multiple purposes and or for after school programs or ACE or whatever. So it may potentially need to go beyond the bonds of what the Massachusetts School Building Authority would put at an elementary school. But then to look at retrofitting the current Turkey Hill building into municipal office space and community space. And the thinking being that because of the office space in the front and the library space in the back, there could be a great opportunity to set up public service functions in the center entrance area of that building, office space in the back wings, potentially PAC as well in the back wings, to continue to utilize the gymnasium for Eagle House and Teen Center activities, Boys and Girls Club activities, and other community activities, as well as take advantage of the existing commercial kitchen that's in that building, which has been a request of the agricultural community in town for some time. It's something that hadn't been discussed publicly previously. I think that there are issues with it personally, but I think that it probably deserves more discussion and more vetting. So there are a variety of different scenarios on the table. I don't know specifically how we're going to whittle those down, but the hope is to do just that, to figure out hopefully some financial rails to put around this, and you know, ideally at either special town meeting or the next annual town meeting, put together a proposal to fund some initial design work. The other thing that I neglected to mention was that I think that there's unanimous or near unanimous opinion here that both Ritter and Town Hall need to be preserved. I don't think that there's consensus around the future use of Town Hall. I think that that's open for discussion to include community space, public meeting space, a variety of other things. But I think everybody kind of believes that we need to complete the work that has been laid out as part of the Vertex reports, which we're, you know, making really good progress at knocking off as part of the capital planning process, but also figure out what the programming plan is for those buildings and the timing and costs associated with doing the interior and ensuring that the internal systems will support whatever that programming might be. So that's where we're at, and our next meeting is in early July. Specific date escapes me. Any further committee reports or questions?
Just maybe a comment related to some of those scenarios is, I find that the schools make it hard for non-school age children to use their facilities. So any promise that a school is going to be renovated and community use will be part of it has never, in my opinion, come to fruition. You know, even things like being able to use the tennis courts for pickleball during school, you know, during the day, never seems to happen. I find that the track is now harder to use, that it's been turned over to the schools. So I would be cautious of any scenario that puts a lot of non-school use in a school building. I think it's a promise that would be likely not to be fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I happen to believe that the reason for that is not a building issue. It's an administrative and personnel issue.
Yeah, not blaming or,
Yeah.
and, you know, certainly.
But administrations change, and you know, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. So when I was a kid, we had a really active adult volleyball and adult basketball program running in the high school gymnasium, and it would run at night after the high school practices were done, and you know, on nights that games weren't scheduled. And I don't know why that doesn't happen now. have no idea.
Yeah.
So, anyway, okay. Any other committee reports? None. Public comment?
Yeah, Peter, if I could. One of the things that I'd like to just put the bug in you guys' ears, with the shallow administrative level that we've got presently for facilities and grounds throughout the town, school and DPW included. Everybody is going to need to keep their eyes and ears open and be as aware as possible of what's supposed to be being done, and what needs to get done, and where there are problems, and report them. As many people know, I'm in the parks daily, one park or the other, or all of them, or whatever, and that's the only way that issues are going to come to light and be dealt with. Until we get the depth that we desperately need in those areas, it's going to be that way. So I just pass that on as one of the things that needs to be really watched, and voices to come forward and say, hey, I saw this, or this is a problem, or all of a sudden this has happened, or whatever, because sometimes it's months before a report gets back to the people that can deal with it.
So the advice is see something, say something?
Yeah, pretty much this, yes. Thank you.
Mr. Baelish.
I just want to thank Dave, frankly, that Dave, I maybe this is a wrong characterization, but I see you as like the older brother of the committee, and you've been such a great voice the year that I've been on. So I just really have appreciated you. I can't say that 100% I've agreed with everything you've said, but I've really appreciated your wisdom through the past year, and thank you, and good luck to you and all the next things that you're doing.
Greatly appreciated.
You're here. So I want to echo that. Everything I said at town meeting still holds. I've shared with a few of you, exactly a little more than 3 years ago now, when I went to the appointments committee to seek appointment to the finance committee. I saw Dave walking into the building, and I didn't know who the other candidates were, and I only really knew Dave through seeing him speak at town meeting and selectmen's meetings, and from his campaign for selectmen that he ran a year or two prior to that, maybe 2 years prior to that.
Yep.
And my perception of Dave at the time was that he was this like old curmudgeon who was going to be impossible to work with. And I kind of second guessed myself as I walked in the building, like, boy, this is going to be, aside from the fact that I've kind of been a rabble rouser in the months preceding joining the finance committee, this is going to be an interesting relationship. And as it turns out, I was wrong about the old curmudgeon thing, but as it turns out, it's been a real pleasure to work with Dave, and I consider him a friend, and I'm going to miss having him as a part of our committee. I don't think I'm going to miss seeing him, because I think he's going to be around no matter what. But it's been a real pleasure to work with you. We have had many disagreements over the last 3 years. These substantive issues, I think we've probably agreed more than we've disagreed, but I think we've disagreed on a lot of really substantive issues. But I think that the conversations have always been constructive and fair, and we've had it out and then just agreed to disagree, or until the next time when this topic comes up again. And I think that that's the way we should be doing business. We should be vetting these issues and driving them to ground as long as it takes, and you know, in some cases to the frustration of town employees, because it's our job to make sure that we are fully informed to make our recommendations to town meeting, where the average voter at town meeting just is not putting the amount of time and energy into these topics as we are. And so Dave has been, you've been the most dedicated, and you put in the most work of any member of the finance committee over the last 3 years. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know you and work with you, and I'll miss having you on the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Just as I was, you know, reiterating or speaking to earlier in my comments, basically what I was trying to say was that dissenting opinion on any board has a very important role in coming to a consensus and bringing all the possible information to the surface and to the public. So, you know, what I was trying to say was, if you disagree with the conversation, don't be afraid to speak up. You may be swayed as the conversation goes along, but if that's in your mind, it should come out verbally so that it can be kicked around by the entire committee. And I thank you again. You know, as you all know, I love this town, born and raised here. One of my biggest issues over the past few years is I had a retirement plan that I put in place almost 10 years ago, and I have put it off because I'm having trouble tearing the roots out of the ground. So thank you to everybody.
I think those roots are really important too. You know, I was thinking earlier today about Dave Rogers' comments about, he was talking about the Parks Department at our committee meeting a couple of months ago. And he brought up Bob Garno, who was mowing the lawn at Marshall Park for years and years and years. And Bob was the next door neighbor of my grandparents. And my recollection of him was that he had a bus. He owned a bus and contracted a single bus route for the town, which a lot of farmers and local businessmen did back in the day. It wasn't a single bus contract. You know, but the people who knew Bob Garno and Enid Wapala, speaking of buses, or Bernie Patton for that matter, you know, I do think it's important that, you know, while we've got a lot of new blood and people who are really experienced and bring great ideas to the town, it's important to remember, you know, where we come from in the not too distant past, because things have changed quite a bit. And it's important to remember those relationships and the collegiality and neighborly way that things used to be done, and to some extent still are around town. It's important to take note of that. So, thank you very much. With that, I see no reason to discuss items for future meetings. We've beat that one to death tonight, as well as upcoming meetings, because we've made those determinations. So is there a motion to adjourn?
If I may, I motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:39 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor, Mr. Menard,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Baelish,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. Thank you very much. Our meeting